Bill 1 will now come to order, and the clerk will call the roll.
Chair Otto.
Here.
Chair Nelson.
Here.
Representative Turner.
Here.
Davis.
Here.
Gonzalez.
Here.
Ashby.
Here.
Senator Hinojosa.
Present.
Huffman.
Here.
Gordner.
Present.
Colcourse.
Here.
Quorum is present. Good morning, members, and welcome to our first formal meeting of the Conference Committee on HB1. I know I speak for all of the House members in saying we look forward to working with our Senate conferees on House Bill 1. This is especially true since I have two very recent House alumni sitting across the dais from us. I also look forward to working with Chair Nelson as we arrive at the state's budget for the next 2 years. Before I begin laying out the anticipated schedule, Chair Nelson, do you have any opening comments?
Sure do. Now, some of us weren't housebroken, but we love that house. Mr. Chairman, I want to say what an honor it is to be working with such a great group of legislators. We've got a very important job to do, and we look forward to begin collaboration with the House to put finishing touches on this budget. It is very clear to me, Mr. Chairman, and you and I have talked about this, but I want to say it in public, our big picture goals are the same. We both prioritize transportation, border security, we both provide significant tax relief, and we both want to support our schools. These budgets have much more in common than they do in conflict, and I am confident that we can work out the differences and pass a budget that can make Texas proud. So we look forward, we are stand ready to work.
Okay, looking forward to it. Members, I know some of you are new to the Appropriations Bill Conference Committee, and I would like to take this time to cover some of what Chair Nelson and I have tentatively agreed to as far as our schedule is concerned. Today, Ursula Parks will lay out a brief overview of some of the major differences between the House and Senate budgets. Sometime over the next couple of weeks, it is our intent to hold another formal meeting, if necessary, to adopt the conference decisions completed over the completed items as you begin your work. We will hold a final formal meeting in this hearing room in order to adopt the rest of the articles and to finalize any pending items at that time. Are there any questions before we ask Ms. Parks to give her layout? Yeah.
Speaking of schedules, I've already started lobbying, and we have great bipartisan support. You know, they ask about lines in the sand, and I do have one line in the sand that I'm requesting, and we don't meet on Mother's Day. We've got mothers on this committee, and we have people with mothers on this committee, and I've been on this committee when we've met on Mother's Day. That's the only thing I'm really asking.
Well, I must not have been chair, so I don't see much need to meet on Mother's Day.
Well, the Senate, then
Yeah.
fathers too. The Senate stands ready to work till midnight every night if we can just have Mother's Day.
Okay. Ms. Parks, are you ready to begin your overview with us?
Good morning, Chair Otto, Chair Nelson. My name is Ursula Parks. I'm the Director of the Legislative Budget Board. I'd like to welcome and congratulate all of you on your appointment to the Conference Committee for the General Appropriations Bill, House Bill 1. My staff and I look forward to working with all of you over the coming weeks and are available at your convenience to assist you in any way that we can. I have a very short presentation this morning to which I'll be referring. We'll be pleased to answer any other questions that you may have in addition to my comments here. Also with me this morning is Sarah Keaton and John McGady, and you're familiar with both of them, I think. They were assigned to the House Appropriations Committee and the Senate Finance Committee, respectively, as they developed their bills. For conference, Sarah and John can answer questions not only about those two bills, but will really be focusing in on the policy areas over which they have purview. Sarah provides oversight for Articles 2, 7, 8, and higher education, and John for Articles 1, 4, 5, 6, and public education. So they'll be a primary resource to you in those areas. As you'll see on page 2 of the presentation, the summary of all funds and GR differences, you'll see that the absolute dollar differences between the House and Senate are relatively modest. $1.6 billion in all funds, and $2.8 billion in general revenue. I would note that 2 years ago, it was also $1.6 billion apart in all funds. It was the exact same all funds difference, but it was a smaller GR difference, only $600 million. In terms of growth from the current biennium, you'll see here that these comparisons that are shown are relative to the 14-15 base. Those percentages will shift a little bit as we finalize a supplemental appropriations bill. They'll get a little bit smaller. You'll see a little less growth from 14-15 relative to the base as that bill gets finalized. As I noted, while the absolute differences in all funds are relatively modest, there are quite a few significant differences in how the funds are allocated between the two bills. I'll note that there are differences in all articles. No article is spared the difference, so everything is on the table. And many agencies within those articles have differences, even relatively small agencies. There are items to be resolved. There are also some articles in which differences can be a little challenging to discern because of how things were funded across articles. You might see some cases in the article comparison tables where differences look very modest, but that is actually masking some pretty significant policy differences to arrive at that number. And some other places where it looks like there's a big difference when actually there's not one, because items are simply funded differently in different articles. So one example that I'd like to point out, if you look at the all funds table, is in Article 6. So in Article 6, it looks like the Senate is $173 million above the House for that article, yeah. However, Article 9, the House provides $162 million for TERP and for LIRAP, which is the same amount that the Senate provided. It's just in Article 9 instead of Article 6. So the difference in 6 is actually quite modest. It's just in a few programs. Those two big programs are the same. There are some very similar approaches with respect to parks and wildlife. There are some differences to be worked out, but the difference is not, as it would appear, just simply based on this method of finance table. Another example would be is that in Article 2, over $800 million of the $1.7 billion difference that you see there is due to a Senate transfer of certain programs to Article 7, to the Workforce Commission. So you see a big difference there, but part of it is still in the bill. It's just in a different article. There's some similar dynamics at the general revenue level as well. In Article 2 and GR, you'll see, again, a relatively modest $360 million difference for Article 2. However, that number does contain some very different policy decisions that were made between the two chambers and how to arrive at that number. The Senate funded cost growth in Medicaid by a net $300 million, so cost and then offset by some cost containment measures that were put in place, while the House funded a primary care physician rate increase of $460 million. So that difference isn't very great, but the policy that's running behind it and the decisions that each chamber made were pretty significantly different. I'd note both chambers funded the health insurance providers fee, so that is the same in both bills. But you'll again see here there's a transfer of certain programs from Article 2 to Article 7 to the Workforce Commission. So that's $100 million of the difference. It's just simply a shift from Article 2 to Article 7 within that function. The other one that I would point out is within the Foundation School Program. So the Senate's $3.9 billion general revenue increase relative to the House is comprised of a couple things. It's $4.5 billion of general revenue that's associated with replacing revenue tied to the tax relief proposals that the Senate has put forward. That is offset by the House increasing the Foundation School Program entitlement by $2.2 billion relative to the Senate's $1.5 billion. So there's a large dollar difference there. The component pieces are also quite different, though. I would note that as different proposals move forward, and I know the House is going to discuss taxes on the floor today, that some of these relationships might change. And as those things happen, we'll bring forward comparisons to you that are as apples to apples as we can do with the information that's available at the time. The last thing that I'll just briefly point out is where each bill is with respect to the constitutional limitations on spending on that last slide. Both the House and Senate have remaining capacity under both the pay-as-you-go, so you can't spend more revenue than the controller says we're going to get, and the spending limit, which limits the growth in spending to the estimated rate of growth in the economy. You can see on the chart there both chambers have capacity. Under the pay-as-you-go limit, the House of $8.4 billion, the Senate of $4.4 billion, and under the general revenue capacity of the spending limit, $2 billion in the House compared to $1.3 in the
Ursula,
Senate.
the House numbers, I'm assuming, do not reflect any tax relief at this point in time, whereas the Senate numbers do?
And that is again correct, yes, sir. The Senate bill increases general revenue spending associated with reducing both property taxes via homestead exemption and also the franchise tax. Those actions do have a relationship to the spending limit and where the bills would be relative to those limits.
Can we drill down on that a
Sure.
little bit? So, the House's tax plan, which I understand is about $4.9 billion, is not assumed in the $8.4 million on up there at the top of the capacity, under the House's pay-as-you-go limit?
That is correct. So what is contained on the Senate side is $4.5 billion associated with a homestead exemption and with a reduction to the franchise tax. A reduction to property taxes drives an increase in general revenue spending to make up that lost revenue to local school districts. A reduction to the property tax relief fund also implies an increase to general revenue that could actually be appropriated or not. In the natural course of business, general revenue would increase to make up that lost PTRF revenue. It's just the way current law works, is that would be made up. On the House side, the package that is going to be contemplated is a sales tax reduction, which would have an implication on the amount of available revenue, but does not have a spending side implication for purposes of this bill. And then again, a franchise tax reduction, which, as I said, in the normal course of how the bill works and how certification works and how funding the foundation school program works, general revenue would increase to make up that lost PTRF revenue.
So under the pay-as-you-go, I'm looking at the top line here, the House's plan is 4.9, is not assumed in the 8.4, but if you look over on the Senate side, that 4.4 accounts for
It accounts for
our tax relief.
Yes, ma'am, it accounts for the increased general revenue spending that would be associated with reducing the franchise tax and the property tax.
Is there any way to estimate at this time, because I know the item you brought up about the franchise tax, and the House's plan that's going to be on the floor today is a combination of two different tax reductions. So in the property tax relief fund, there will be, as you talked about, the automatic filling back in with general revenue for whatever that amount of lost revenue is. Is there any way to, and the reason I brought the difference up is I didn't want people to walk out of here and say, well, look how much more room the House had. Well, it's because the Senate addressed tax issues already. The House is addressing them today on the floor.
That's right.
So that number will change, and it will, if our bills pass, it will be somewhere, I don't know exactly where. Is there any way to contemplate where it would fall?
If one assumed passage of the bills that are going to be on the House floor today, House Bills 31 and 32, and also actually, if one assumed enactment and paying for the school finance proposal that is also on the table on the House side, the House would be about $2.8 billion.
Now you're including
under the
the 800.
pay-as-you-go limit.
Okay, but
That's
you're now
right. So,
including the 800 million.
Yeah.
That's
for
set in
that.
Article 11 right now.
That's right. That's right. So it'd be a
All
little
right.
bit
If
more
you
than
exclude
that.
that, if I'm just trying to look at the tax.
Yeah, then you'd be more like 3.5.
3.5. Okay. Yeah. Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, so y'all need to understand, so it applies to the pay-as-you-go, but it does not impact what your capacity is under GR?
It does both.
Okay.
Both things would be affected, and they're affected in slightly different ways. So on the House side, the sales tax reduction affects how much revenue is available. That is just simply a revenue reduction measure
For 16, 17.
for 16-17.
Right.
And again, the franchise tax reduction affects how much money comes into the property tax relief fund, and there's that implication. Both of those also affect how much general revenue capacity there is under the spending limit. And that's the case for the franchise tax reduction in the Senate as well. Both of those measures reduce pure state tax revenue, and that revenue on the PTRF side is then made up with revenue that is just coming out of general revenue as a whole, which is less subject to the limit. So actually reducing the franchise tax and reducing the sales tax, both, interestingly, give you increased capacity, general revenue capacity under the spending limit.
Representative Enos.
I guess just a little bit of clarification. When we talk about the sales tax reduction, I guess 2.3 billion, that's not included in this budget on the House side, correct?
No, sir, I have not reflected that in any of the numbers that are in the presentation before you.
So
And neither is the franchise tax reduction, not reflected in the budget, in the House. It's down. Our budget just reflected allowing the room for those bills to pass.
because I guess I heard 16, 17, so that any sales tax reduction will kick in next session. Bang.
Yep.
Thank you.
Wait, say that again? What?
Well, the sales tax reduction would affect the amount of revenue that's available for 16-17.
Well,
So we're putting off the amount that Senator Hinojosa just mentioned is not accounted for in your budget today. But when we go into 16, 17, assuming you and I both are back here, we're going to find an extra, if that bill passes, an extra how much, Ursula?
Well, what I was saying is that the reduction to sales tax contemplated in House Bill 31, which is $2.3 billion, would be a reduction in available revenue for 16-17. So it affects the amount of revenue that you're working with right now.
Go ahead, Representative Turner.
Again, I'm just trying to get clarification. So if the sales tax goes into effect, 2.3 billion, does that on the House side, does it wipe away the available revenue that we have at 2 billion underneath the spending cap?
No, sir, actually it gives you more capacity under the spending limit. It reduces how much revenue you have under the pay-as-you-go limit.
Okay, I got you.
Senator Coco.
Just put those numbers together again. So 2.3 billion in sales tax. The
Yes, ma'am.
800 million that is in Article 11 for the House side. And what other number am I missing on that?
2.6 billion on the franchise tax side, if you're asking for.
And that's all going to come out of the pay-as-you-go limit on the House side where it reflects 8.4 billion. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, and so if you assumed all of those actions taking place, then the amount of room that the House would have under the pay-as-you-go limit would be at about $2.8 billion.
2.8 billion. And then one clarification for me is the capacity under maximum GR pursuant to the spending limit that is currently in place would
Yes,
then
ma'am.
be what if all those actions were assumed?
Then if all of those actions were assumed, there would be capacity of about 2.6 billion. So capacity actually increases.
Because the sales tax is assumed in the next biennium, or that's,
It has to do with the mix of revenue that's supporting appropriations. So the mix of revenue that is supporting appropriations becomes less pure state tax revenue, which is what is limited by the spending limit. So, and becomes revenue that is more a mix of tax revenue, fee revenue, other general revenues that are in the Treasury, and that provides more an ability to spend a little bit more GR under the spending limit.
so capacity as pay-as-you-go would go, assuming the actions today would go to 2.8 billion, and then the next line would go to 2.6 billion, am I correct, on page 5?
Yes, and we can provide all of that to the
Thank you
to the
so
full
much.
committee.
And Ms.
Yeah, Senator Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding available revenue, the changes as envisioned under the sales tax plan of the House, has the comptroller given any inclination as to the certification of the budget and how that would be viewed by the comptroller's office?
Well, that $2.3 billion estimate that I provided on how much available revenue would go down under House Bill 31 is the controller's estimate. So that this is in alignment to how much the controller estimates revenue would change under that tax proposal. If you're asking a broader question about how much revenue the controller will certify is available, I would defer to the Office of the Controller for that.
All right, thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, as we move forward, and I know, you know, it is the preference of the House not to have our tax discussions in this conference committee discussions. But
Well, it's not a preference thing, it's just that,
you're being
that
instructed.
whoever ends up, there will be a separate conference committee on tax bills.
Right,
Which,
right.
I may or may not be involved in.
But do we not need to cordon off so that we can make our other decisions? At least 4.5 billion that we, under pay-as-you-go or any other scenario that would leave capacity under all constitutional limits that would accommodate any of the proposals that are out there.
I would agree with you, Chair Nelson, that my main concern this entire session has been not the spending cap, because I think both bodies are gonna be under the spending cap. Actually, y'all are a little closer to it than we are. It's the pay-as-you-go limitation. So my feeling is we have to try to reconcile the two budgets, understanding that there is a separate issue out there dealing with tax cuts. And we both have to consider them, obviously, but my hope is that as we get closer to the deadline, that we will have a clearer picture as to what's going to come out on conference on that issue.
Well, and Mr. Chairman, I always like to think and you make a great difference of pointing out the differences. Pay-as-you-go is like the money we have left in the bank.
That's correct.
And right now the House has 2.8, right, left in the bank. And if the Senate does everything we say we want to do tax-wise, we would have 4.4 billion left in the bank or something.
That's where you are right now, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, I think it's an important distinction to make, and if we keep back in our.
But I would also point out that there's some other issues out there where on different methods, and for example, in transportation, some of your transportation funding is based on constitutional amendments which won't kick in until after those pass. The House chose to put general revenue in the budget of about $1.5 billion. So those, when all those kinds of things are going as we go to conference and work this out, that's going to change this pay-as-you-go as we make those decisions.
One thing that I do like to point out about all of these numbers is that they are absolutely a snapshot in time. They will absolutely change with your decisions, not only on this bill, but on the supplemental bill, the tax bills, other bills affecting state fiscal policy in other ways. So it is something that we track very, very closely and that we will be in regular communication with you on where you are and making sure that you stay within those limitations that are prescribed by the Constitution.
Senator Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair. I just would like to point out the budget has to be squared with tax relief proposals, and the concern that I see forthcoming is in mainly Article 3 with the amount of money that's going toward the basic allotment on the House side versus the amount of money that's utilized in the property tax relief fund to square up the property tax exemption. And it's hard to close a budget without clarification and vision on what the actual tax relief proposals will be.
I would agree with you. Unfortunately, in the House, we have a separate committee that deals with taxes, unlike the Senate where you do both budget and taxes in Senate Finance. We're not structured that way. But we fully have to take it into account in order to.
Clarity and vision are necessary to actually complete the work here.
Right, I agree. That's why I said we're going to have to have some decisions in those areas before we can finalize what we're doing. Okay, members, any other? I didn't mean to, we got into a long discussion. I'm not, is that, well, that's actually, I guess, the last page?
Yes, sir, that concludes my remarks.
That concludes your remarks?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Representative Turner.
And how do both chambers handle dedicated accounts?
Both chambers, both bills, both the House and Senate bills, did reduce reliance on general revenue dedicated. They both had significant appropriations from GR dedicated. I think in the Senate, there was coming up balances of $400 and something million, and in the House, it was close to $800 million. There are some areas that are the same between the two. I mentioned CHIRP and LIRAP. Those are big areas. System Benefit Fund is treated the same in both bills, but there are some differences. I know that there are, you have a separate package of bills with respect to general revenue dedicated that were passed off the House floor yesterday that will actually in turn affect this analysis from the point of view of the House. Some of that even further drawing down of the use of GRD reduces the amount of revenue that's available for certification. So we'll be bringing that forward to you as well.
Members, are there any other questions for Ms. Parks? Or any other? If not, Chair Nelson, do you have any closing remarks?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I just want to say that we stand ready to roll up our sleeves and get to work. We already have assigned out, Senator Colfort's is going to handle Article 3, Senator Schwartner, Article 2, Senator Huffman, 1, 4, and 5, Senator Hinojosa, 6, 7, and 8.
So what are you going to do?
We, I'm going to work with the chairman with vision and clarity. I love that. I love that, Senator Schwartner. Mr. Chairman, I think we can resolve just about everything, and I hope that we can work full steam ahead to get all of the issues we can resolve done. I think it's quite possible. We are ready to work, and then we'll work together to resolve some of those other issues that may take a little bit more time. But I'm urging everybody to get to work and get as much done as we possibly can.
I agree. The House stands ready to get to work. We do want to see this process ended. We feel like we can get a budget and get out of here.
We will.
So, thank everybody for their attendance today. If there's no other comments, the conference committee on House Bill 1 stands adjourned.